Here we go, jumping into our general psych, chapter 13, social psychology. Again, another one of my favorite chapters. Really wish we were in class for this one. Just because there are so many videos to show, so many social psychology situations we could be talking about in class, but unfortunately, this is one of our off weeks. So I had to decide which ones that I would leave for online versus our class time. And I figured you would really want to be in class for psychological disorders and therapy. So, which is why I had to adjust. All right, so here's a vignette for your viewing pleasure. So if you want, go ahead and check this out. But for time's sake, I'm going to skip on through that. Of course, if we were in class, we'd have a good discussion about it. All right, so what is social psychology? So you might be interested in studying in the field of psych, but again, you don't want to be a therapist. You don't want to, sit with somebody discussing their emotions or problems, but you might want to be on the back end of that. Maybe you want to be a researcher and you want to understand what makes people feel certain emotions and how other people influence each other. So that's where social psych comes in, because that's the study of looking at thoughts, so cognitions, emotions, and behaviors, and how they relate to each other. So question is, how does social psych differ from sociology? Well, social psych explores the way that individuals behave on, basically how they behave when it comes to other group influences, how they think and feel, versus sociology is looking at the whole group, looking at just the group themselves, their societies, their cultures, and then their subcultures. All right, so research methods in general psych, basically it's going to involve the same sets of principles. The way we research now is definitely not the way that they researched back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, as you see with the two most infamous cases in social psych, which is the Milgram study on obedience and the Stanford prison study by Philip Zimbardo. Now we have to go through an institutional review board or an IRB, and we can't deceive participants like we used to, or, lie to them. Well, which is deception. Anyways, and that's because of psychological harm. So, but they ask why is deception sometimes? I cannot speak today. Slow. Why is deception sometimes necessary? Well, think about it. Sometimes to get true participant results and feelings, you have to deceive, you have to lie. If Dr. Zimbardo said, hey, this prison study I'm doing, really, we're not looking at prison life. Really, we're just looking at how you react when we put someone in control of you. Or with the Milgram study, hey, if we told you that those shocks were actually not real, then you would have just shocked people without even caring about it. So, in order to get true, accurate results, sometimes you have to deceive your participants. But when you do that at the very end, in usually all cases, except for some that are in naturalistic studies where you're just doing observation just to see reactions, you will usually debrief after. So you will say, I'm sorry that I lied to you, but I had to because I needed to get true results, to get accurate data to see if this is how people actually would act on their own. All right, so let's skip on around a little bit. So 3 dimensions of attribution. You've got controllable, uncontrollable, stable, unstable, and then internal, external. You got a situation, Alexa was 15 minutes late for her first date with Dennis. These are controllable situations and uncontrollable situations. Stable, unstable situation. On date number 2, Dennis proved himself to be a good cook. So he proved that after going on a date that he was able to cook or not cook, whatever. And then internal, external situation. Alexa had bad luck meeting guys on Tinder before she met Dennis. So looking at 2 different sets of qualities, internal, external, which I'm not going to get into that because that has to do with the vignette anyways. All right, skipping through the collaboration. All right, so they've been talking a lot lately for a few years about social media and psychology and what is a selfie, what does it imply, you know, are you posting selfies for shock factor? When you post it, they say to actually think about what is the message you're trying to get across. So they ask, think about the last time you posted a professional headshot on LinkedIn or a fun photo on Instagram. What was your motivation for doing so? Selfies help you control the shot to highlight your best features. So, you know, there's a whole other discussion about catfishing and, you know, all the filters and why you do it, what makes you do it, what is perception of attractiveness, what is considered socially attractive, and blah, blah, blah. But of course, it's very difficult to discuss this when you're talking to yourself. So the book does a decent job at kind of highlighting what's in a selfie. All right, the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to overestimate the degree to which characteristics of an individual are the cause of an event, and to underestimate the involvement of situational factors. So looking at 2 types of errors in attribution. So they give the example, victims of sexual assault and the #me movement. All right, we're gonna skip over a lot of this. This is a cute little cartoon. This is the self-serving bias. Go ahead and take a look at this. Pause on your own if you'd like. But we're skipping on through because we're not together. All right. So attitudes. Let's go on to attitudes. Where do they come from? Do they come from nature, nurture, which is genetics versus environment? Where do they come from? So when you think about your attitudes, and I don't mean like your attitude, like, oh, you have an attitude. I just mean your normal attitude. Where do you think that comes from? When you look at your home life, when you look at your friend groups and who you socially interact with and what you post on social media and all of those things, where do you think that comes from? So they say that attitudes are shaped by a bunch of different things through your interactions with others, but also through your internal things like when you're by yourself and you're watching something or you're reading a book or just when you're in your alone time, that there are other factors that shape your attitudes. And can attitudes predict behavior? So people are more likely to act on their attitudes when something important is at stake. Stronger, more enduring attitudes are stronger predictors of behavior. Okay, so cognitive dissonance is a state of tension that results when behaviors are inconsistent with attitudes. So basically, it's saying that when it's not, cognitive dissonance it's kind of like a conflicting pattern where it's not how you're acting is not consistent with the attitude that you're displaying. So they give a little, if you look down a little bit, it said I liked the boring task because I got paid $20, not because I actually liked it. So it's basically a conflicting term. All right, social influence. We're going to skip over a lot of this stuff because I want to get more into different things. All right, so let's look at compliance. I want you to know the difference between compliance and conformity. So when you look at compliance, so when you comply with something, you're doing that because you're being requested to do that. whether it's from another person or it's from a group member, but it has nothing to do with an authority figure. So we have a couple different types of compliance techniques. You've got the foot in the door and then the door in the face. So the foot in the door is you make a small request and then you follow it with a larger. And then the door in the face is you make a large request. Sometimes it doesn't seem reasonable. And you do that because you know that it's not going to happen. So then you can follow through with a smaller request. So if you look at foot in the door, that's the one that most people use. So the example they give in the book is if you have already said yes to a small request, chances are you're now going to say yes to a larger request. So example they give is you first ask, your parent if you can have $5, and then they're like, okay, and then you ask for more money. Or it can be, you ask to spend the night, or you ask to go to a friend's house. Your parents are like, okay. And then that was just to get the foot in the door to go to the friend's house. And then you're like, hey, can I stay the night? Or I'm sorry, you're like, no, stay the night. That's good. That would be the next step. And then they're like, oh, I thought you were just going over there. But you're like, well, I'm here already. So then the parents are like, well, all right, as long as you have, something to wear, whatever. And then maybe after that, you're like, oh, well, I want to know if I could go to the mall as well with them. And they're like, I thought you were just going to spend the night. And so you see that the request is becoming larger and larger. To then the final might be, well, now you're at the mall and you're like, yeah, I don't have a ride home. We were supposed to have a ride and now we don't. So can you pick us up? So it went from this, hey, just kind of hanging out at my friend's house to spending the night to going to the mall to, hey, can you pick us up? And then the opposite of the door in the face is asking a parent for a large amount of money. And they're like, no. But you know your parents. So you're like, oh, okay, I'll ask for a lot. Then they're going to say, no, you're crazy. So then really I wanted only a small amount. But if I ask for more, then when I accept less, then it'll seem like no big deal. The book gives a little bit of a different example. All right, so conformity is when you modify your own behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs to match other people. So you conform to things that you normally wouldn't because maybe you don't want to look weird to other people, or you don't want to look like you're being different than someone else. So just know the difference between compliance and conformity and what they entail. Okay, so Solomon Asch's conformity study, this is one of the first ones in social influence. And then from there, kind of morphed into the Stanley Milgram study, and then morphed into the Zimbardo Stanford prison study. So in Solomon's Asch conformity study, which I will upload the videos, each participant is asked to look at these set of lines. And you can see that they're in groups, and they say when you're in a group of 3 or more, then you will be more likely to conform. So you're looking at the standard line, and when you're looking at it, you're like, okay, I can see that the second one matches the standard line. But if you have a bunch of people saying, oh, it's 1, 1, 1, 1. By the time it gets to you, you're like going, hey, wait a minute. It doesn't look like 1 to me, but maybe something's wrong with me. Or, well, I don't want to look like an idiot. What if they're right and I'm wrong? Or, you might be an outlier and you're like, no, I definitely know it's 2. But what they noticed in the study was that more people often went with the group because of social pressure. So I will post that short video for you to watch. All right, so know the 3 reasons why people conform. So you've got your normative social influence, your informational social influence, and then reference group. All right, so situational factors that increase conformity. So you look at this increased likelihood and decreased likelihood. So the group includes at least 3 other people who are unanimous. These are the things you want to know. You have to report your decision in front of others and give your reasons. You are faced with a task you think is difficult, and you are unaware of your ability to perform a task. So those are going to be the reasons that you are more than likely you will conform. And then decreased likelihood of conformity, at least one other person is going to go against the group, or the group members come from individualist or me-centered cultures as opposed to collectivist, community-centered cultures. All right, we're skipping through this. All right, so this is another good one. The Obedience Study by Stanley Milgram, which know what obedience is. So what he asked was, how far would people go in terms of punishing others when urged to do so by an authority figure? Now, the reason that he did the study was because he was trying to understand why Hitler in the Nazi regime, why people were so influenced by him, and why that they would allow such atrocities to occur. And so he thought it was a German mentality, that there must be something characteristically wrong with Germans for them to go through, killing so many Jews. And so he wanted to do this as a pilot study and then bring it over. And they thought, his researchers thought that only 0.1% would go all the way. And what they found in the study was that 65% went all the way to the end, and 100% went all the way to 450 volts. And so it's a crazy, interesting study that really showed social psychologists why people do what they do when they're in social situations. So that is another video I'm going to post. So when you look at factors that lead to obedience, on his experiment, he had a Dyson big giant shock box, and it looked real. It had all the bells and whistles. It lit up. It had all of these words on there, all the way from slight shock all the way to XXX. And to further manipulate the teacher learner, so in this study, one was the teacher and one was the learner. And I'm going to actually post the video because I want to get your feedback on it. But what, the participants didn't know, or what the teacher didn't know, was that the learner was in on the study. So he was a confederate or stooge of the study. So he wasn't actually getting shocked, but he was made to believe, the teacher was made to believe that the learner was getting shocked. And in order to produce some believability in this, the researcher said, the one that wore the lab technician coat, said, it's only fair that if the learner is going to be shocked, that you get a sample shock. So they asked the teacher to close their eyes. And also, mind you, this was rigged. So when they drew the slips of paper, both slips of paper said teacher. So it was rigged from the onset. So anyway, so the researcher said, all right, well, it's only fair you get a sample shock. So the only shock that was live was this third one in the third position, and that was the 45 volt shock. Each were in 15 volt increments. So 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, all the way up to 450. And the sample shock was the 45 volt. It was the only live shock. Every other one was dead. So the teacher got the sample shock, and when asked, what voltage do you think this was, most of them, the majority said 75 volts plus. So what that tells you is that when you're administering these electric shocks, or when the teacher is, in their mind, they are shocking this person on the other side of the wall that is, they told him that this study was on memory and learning. So they had to memorize this word pair. And if they didn't get it correct, they would get a shock of 15 volts and it would go up. So the next one would be 30, then 45, and so on. And so if the teacher got the shock of 45 volts, then in their mind, they're thinking, oh my God, by the time it gets to 100, and 10 volts or whatever, that it's crazy. Like, this has got to be so painful. And even though the researcher states in the very beginning that although the shocks might be painful, they don't cause any permanent tissue damage or anything. And the Confederate, the stooge in on the experiment, says in the very beginning, it's the same person the whole time, because again, he's part of the experiment, but the teacher doesn't know that. So he says in the beginning, I was at the hospital recently and, they said I had a heart murmur. So is this going to be okay? And so the researcher said, although they're painful, no permanent tissue damage, blah, blah, blah. And as the experiment is going, you hear the learner on the other side of the wall protesting to stop. This hurts. You can't do this to me, banging on the wall. And so the teacher just continues to go. And so it was a very, very influential social psychology experiment, and one that got Stanley Milgram death threats because they thought he was sadistic. How could you do this? And he was very surprised that people in America would go the distance that they did. And what they found is that people will conform when it comes to an authority figure. So again, very interesting study. And I will also include in the still there's a movie based on Stanley Milgram. It's called The Experimenter. All right, so diffusion of responsibility, that is another one term I want you to know. So that is the sharing of duties and responsibilities among all group members that can lead to feelings of decreased accountability and motivation. So what they're saying is that when there's more people around, you are going to feel like, okay, well, I don't have to do anything because somebody else will do that. And there is a term coming up, the bystander effect, which is kind of goes along with this diffusion of responsibility. All right, so I'm going to get to that. De-individuation is just when you're this, kind of lack of sense of responsibility because you're kind of hiding behind a mask. So that's what they give the example in the costumes. All right, so that diffusion of responsibility that was a couple slides back, that stems from what is known as the bystander effect. And know what that term is as well. That's when people avoid getting involved in situations because they are under the assumption that someone else is going to help. And the reason this came to be was back in 1969, I believe it was. I have to go back and look. Kitty Genovese, who is pictured on your right, she was brutally stabbed and sexually assaulted in front of 38 bystanders while, they say no one did anything to help her. And so that case blew up and there was so much investigation and it led into the bystander effect. And many studies after that looked into why do people not help when people are put in, or when people see these situations. So in extremely dangerous situations, people are more likely to help even if there is more than one person watching. So there's a lot of research. There was research done by Pilyavin, and it's a subway Samaritan study where they put that theory to the test. So that's another one I will link so that you can look at. All right, looking at aggression, because there's a difference between aggression and assertiveness. So aggression is intimidating or threatening behavior or attitudes intended to hurt someone. And again, you're going to see that in most of these chapters, twins are talked about a lot. And that is because twins are the highest studied group in psychology because of the whole nature-nurture debate. All right, so when you look at aggression and gender, males are more directly aggressive. They're more physically aggressive than women. Women are more verbally aggressive. And they ask, why do you think that is? So many environmental factors set the stage. So childhood abuse, exposure to various traumas. Those events could trigger epigenetic changes that can then alter expression of genes. So everything in our life, the biggest debate is the nature nurture. And so due to traumatic events, they shape how our genes then change and how environmental factors cause that change. All right, stereotypes. Know what stereotypes are. They are conclusions or inferences we make about people who are different from us based on their group membership, such as race, religion, age, or gender. Then you have your groups and your social identity, your in-group, your out-group, and then your social identity. Know the difference between discrimination and prejudice. I don't need to read that to you, but just know the difference between the two. This is a good, kind of visual that shows you, stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. I'm also going to upload a video from a very famous study done by Jane Elliott called the Blue Eye, Brown Eyes experiment, where you see on the right, very famous study. The first time I saw it, I was so mad. But then I understood, why she did that experiment. And she traveled all over the world, doing a lot of appearances, Oprah, I think The Tonight Show, way back when, and putting this discrimination to the test of people, today. All right. Okay, so I talked about the Stanford prison study. So 1971, this was an experiment done by Dr. Philip Zimbardo, where he took male college students and he assigned them prisoners and guards, kind of following on the work of Stanley Milgram. Those two both were actually in school together. And so Zimbardo wanted to understand, to kind of expand his knowledge on what he learned through the Milgram study. So the behavior of some guards and prisoners became so disturbing that this 2-week experiment stopped after just 6 days. So there's also a movie based off of this documentary called the Stanford Prison Study. Excellent movie to watch. Dr. Zimbardo was on the set of that movie to make sure that it was very accurately depicted on his study. So I'm going to be including a lot of links for you to look at. All right, secret to happiness. And then, listen to me. Interpersonal attraction. So a lot of people ask me, about relationships, and we discuss a lot in my classes about interpersonal attraction and what keeps people attracted to each other, what keeps people together. And of course, people break up because the relationship deal is you meet somebody, you're like, oh, it's like the very beginning of this, swiping right. When you're swiping right, are you really swiping right? Meaning, are you really swiping right for you? And so people look, and the first thing they see is physical attractiveness. And of course, you need to be physically attracted to somebody. But when you're, having all these butterflies in your stomach and your hormones are raging and you've got all this fireworks, well, that's kind of like how they end. Because when you don't form friendships within your relationships, your romantic ones, usually they're going to explode just like they started. So 3 important factors that I want you to know for keeping relationships is proximity, similarity, and physical attractiveness. So Let's see if I put that in here. So proximity means that you need to live close together. And I don't mean like live together, but proximity is being in the same town. Some distant relationships work, but not many. Those are the outliers. So you need to be relatively in the same area. And then similarity. When they say opposites attract, they absolutely do, but they also, when they attract, what happens? It's like this competing force. So in order to keep a relationship, you need to have similarity. You need to have the same values and belief systems. You don't need to be just like your partner because that's boring, but you do need to have the same likeness of your partner, because if you don't and you have different values, then after all of the honeymoon phase wears off, then those values are going to conflict, and then you're going to have problems in the relationship, which then leads to breakup. And then physical attractiveness. You have to be physically attracted to your partner. It doesn't mean that your partner is attracted to someone else, meaning like if I look at somebody and I don't think they're attractive, it doesn't mean that you don't. So you have to be attracted to that person, or else eventually those are parts of the puzzle that make everything chip away. So just know those three things. All right. Love, intimacy. All right. So also there are different kinds of love resulting from combinations of three elements. Know those three elements. You've got passion, intimacy, and commitment. The ideal form, consummate love, combines all three of those. So passion is that's that, like, you have to look at your person and, you know, ideally feel the same way about them on day one as you do day 1001. Intimacy is a connection. You have to have intimacy with your partner. Intimacy doesn't have to do with sex. It has to be, you know, you can be intimate with your children. You are intimate with your best friend. It's being able to connect with somebody and them understanding you and you understanding them. And then lastly, commitment. You have to be committed. So that means you don't go off, you don't go astray when things get rough. You fight. I don't mean you fight. You fight for your relationship. You work through it. So if little roadblocks pop up, you know, that's normal. You know, you don't walk away from situations when you hit a roadblock. I'm not talking when it comes to abuse or anything like that. I'm talking about, you know, when people wonder why 50% of marriages end in divorce, it's because they don't have those three components of passion, intimacy, or commitment. So just make sure when you're choosing a life partner, if you know you are choosing a life partner, that you have those three elements with them. Okay. All right, we don't need to look at that. Using what you've learned, be conscious of the attributions you use to explain the behaviors of others. Attitudes can have a powerful impact on behavior. Behaviors are constantly shaped by your social interactions. Understand the dangers of prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping. Know the human suffering caused by aggression. Be kind and helpful to others, and allow yourself to experience love. If you do not allow yourself to experience love, then you cannot give love to someone else. That's the biggest misconception, is that people think that if I love them enough, or if I give love, then I'll get love. And that is the biggest road to heartbreak. You must love yourself above and beyond anyone else in order to give love to somebody else, because you can't make someone love you. You can't fix somebody. You can't love somebody through it. You can only loving yourself. When you love yourself and you're good to yourself and committed to yourself, then when you're in a relationship with somebody else, then what that does is you're just enhancing what you already have. It's probably one of the biggest questions, or one of the biggest situations I have with my clients in therapy. Individual, I don't do couples, oh no, is their inability to actually be good to themselves. And then they wonder why their relationships don't work. And that is the reason. So if you want to talk about that further in class, by all means, bring it up and we will discuss it, because I love talking about relationships. All right, so until next time, be good to yourself and each other. Peace.